Hello, I'm MPXToyCat, and it seems as though the end of consoles is upon us. Or at least this is a prediction people have been making ever since this generation did come out, because the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, and the Nintendo Switch have sold significantly worse than their previous generation counterparts, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the Nintendo Wii. Especially when you combine them, it seems as though the only console that will ever overtake its previous generation is the PlayStation 4, overtaking the PlayStation 3. And when you compare the fact that, like, wait a minute, so the PS3, the Xbox 360, and the Wii are still supported in various ways, with notably the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 being marketed as budget consoles with their online services still being active. When you take all of this information together, and when you take the fact that really the 8th generation didn't replace the 7th generation, it makes you question, is the end of consoles really upon us? And it seems as though all of the mainstream manufacturers are making comments that hint that there's going to be huge change-ups, towards that end. So let's talk about what they are, because this is some pretty interesting news to do with the gaming industry as a whole, which I hope you all do enjoy, by the way. But let's dive straight into it, and let's start by talking about Nintendo Switch, because if you look at the Nintendo Switch compared to all of their previous consoles for the last 20-30 years, you'll notice how Nintendo has combined their portable console offerings and their, regular home console offerings into one. On the surface, this looks a little bit like they're trying to combine their consoles into one to make a mega console, but if you dive into it a bit more, you realize that really they're trying to compete in the very fast-growing mobile market, which they also do by literally making mobile phone games. The Switch is really a competitor to mobile gaming, and it does a very good job at that by having controllers and having first-party Nintendo games, so it's a great mobile device that also to some extent competes with whatever your home entertainment device is, or your PC, you could argue, because you bring it home, you put it in the dock, and then you can play your first-party titles there. The fact that it's a hybrid of these two things really just means that it's competing in a whole different field to the other consoles, and that is a part of what makes its success so interesting in my opinion, because it is a hugely fast-selling console. It might be the best-selling in this generation if it keeps up its current speed or keeps improving, which it is on track to do. So when you look at the fastest and best of the consoles and see that it doesn't really compete in the console space and tries to instead do other things, you start to see a sign of things to come. But then you start seeing other pieces of news coming out, such as Sony literally saying we live in a post-console world. Not that we're going to soon, but that we literally do to some extent now. And I think he has a really interesting quote if we dive into this a bit more than you'll see in some headlines. So, sure, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro provide what, of course, we think is the best gaming experience. But the other consoles out there, be it Switch, Xbox One X, or tablets, or phones, they're great experiences across all of these. What we need to do is recognize that, we're not little gaming ghettos that are not federated or aligned at all. We're all part of the same gaming community. We just come at it through different doorways. I think the future will be an extension of that metaphor. Your platform is not your hideaway, it's a doorway to all of these other gamer folk. Basically, he's implying right there that instead of, living in a world where like, oh yeah, PlayStation and Xbox rivalry is the biggest thing in games, it's really going to be like, oh yeah, we're making different gaming experiences, most of which you can play across them. We've seen this last generation in particular. Most of the big titles have been available on every single platform, with the exclusives being the minority. They might be the titles you care about the most for, say, Switch with Mario Odyssey or, Breath of the Wild or Smash Brothers even. It might be, the games you care about most on Xbox with, the new Halo games, or, you might really love God of War on the PlayStation. But the truth is, if you want to play most of the best-selling games, say Minecraft, say Call of Duty, say, any sports game franchise, it's available on all the consoles, and there's a huge number of big games out there that are kind of like that. So the game manufacturers are trying to shift tone on this one, and the biggest shift we're seeing is from Microsoft. So let me clarify, this is a rumor. It is something that's just being stated a lot. It could turn out to be not true, but it's worth mentioning that Microsoft's reaction is even more severe than that, even more severe than saying we live in a post-console world, even more severe than basically competing with phones. And, Nintendo has said they're not making a Switch 2. They want to keep this console going as long as humanly possible. So even bigger than basically going with both those systems, we have Microsoft/Xbox who are doing something so big it might change the face of gaming in a huge way, because Xbox Games Pass might be coming to the Switch. So again, this is a rumor. The rumor is that the Games Pass is soon going to be launching on the Switch, with the goal being launching all of the titles, including Microsoft ones, over on the Switch. And you might say, why would you do that? Why would you give up your exclusives, one of your biggest things, and let your competitor, the Nintendo, play them? And that's because, again, if you don't see them as a competitor, what you instead get there, instead of saying, oh, we're going to lose Xbox sales, instead you'll gain subscribers to Games Pass. So many people, myself included by the way, would pick up Games Pass if you could play it on your Switch, for instance. And given that Games Pass makes Microsoft a recurring monthly income, similar to how Netflix can make a lot more money than a movie rental company, or even like a cinema/a movie theater, you can imagine like, okay, well, I mean, if you can make more money on these recurring transactions, then it would be really cool if you could get Nintendo customers in on that. Xbox Live, it's on the Switch. Xbox Live integration came first, to another console on the Switch. It seems as though the integration between Microsoft and Nintendo, and maybe eventually Microsoft and Sony, seems to be getting closer and closer as we've, gone from the, 20 years ago world where there were 3 distinct consoles. If you think about, the N64, the PlayStation 1, like, the Dreamcast or whatever, when you looked at those consoles, they were hugely different. Like, they literally used different medium, like, for instance, the N64 had cartridges at a stage where the PlayStation 1 had discs, so you get larger storage sizes on the PlayStation 1, but then, the PS1, to kind of counteract that, had a better controller. There were huge differences in how you played in every aspect, both how the console was, how much it cost, the performance, the disc, the this, the that, whereas nowadays, we've ended up in a situation where all of the consoles are more and more kind of like PC-like devices. So if you take Microsoft and Sony in particular, because it's a little different with Nintendo, the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 are basically little PC devices. They're built with the same architecture, very similar, that you could just buy for an off-the-shelf PC. It uses x86, the same as your PC, if you own one, probably does as well, and you can kind of see how, like, oh yeah, the consoles have slight differences. The PlayStation 4 original has more power than the Xbox One, but the Xbox One X has more power than PlayStation 4 Pro. They have slightly different controllers, but the reality is they're more and more similar platforms by the day, and then it raises the question of, like, well, in a world where the number of console sales is slowly decreasing because of the increase in mobile gamers and the increase, in PC gaming in particular, if it's like, well, if people are moving to both those segments, then why do we need to compete so much? Because historically, what tended to happen when this came up, like a really big selling, generation with a lot of consoles, followed by one that didn't sell too well, a lot of, console manufacturers would go bust. I mentioned the Dreamcast earlier. That was the last Sega console. They couldn't afford to keep making consoles off that, and they started moving to making cross-platform games. But what if instead of just moving solely, like Sega and being a cross-platform developer, which is why there are Sonic games on Nintendo platforms and even on Xbox platforms, but like instead of moving from a model where you make consoles to not making them, why not continue making consoles while also making that switch? Why not have just a world of consoles with a world of IPs, some of which may be, exclusive, but if you're going to make money developing these games, it might make sense to launch them on the other consoles in other places. An interesting example of this might be, for instance, Nintendo, who has a really smart plan of making mobile versions of some of their games, because Super Mario Run must have got so many people into the Mario games who later might have gone on to buy Mario Odyssey or the new Super Mario Bros. Game which just came out, the Animal Crossing game which came out for the phones. It's not a great Animal Crossing game, but it got people into the franchise who might then appreciate that and realize, actually, this Animal Crossing for Switch, I'm going to buy that right now. I think that could be the smart move we see from Nintendo, and the smart moves we see from Microsoft and Sony might just be releasing their games in more places elsewhere, and hopefully one of the key things that will make the difference between the end of consoles versus the evolution of consoles is purely how they deal with this and if they make it better for the end user. Right now, the argument for a console versus a PC really comes down to your own personal preference, but the biggest benefits for consoles has always historically been that games are built for that hardware, it'll run on that hardware, it'll be fine, and your friends are on the hardware, they're always connected, it's very easy to be social, and it's very easy to have games which are usually optimized for the device you're running on. If they can improve on these points and make them true again, because they've kind of faded in the last generation, or they can come up with similar reasons why consoles can be good dedicated gaming devices as opposed to the multi-purpose devices that are PCs or are whatever device you're running, Linux or Mac or whatever. So the key alternative should be like, okay, it's going to be simple, it's going to be easy, it's going to be effective, it's going to work well, it's going to be social, but they need to focus and double down on these sorts of things. And we saw them do the opposite of this generation, and it hasn't really worked too well. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see how we go from here. The PlayStation 5 is going to be announced at some point. The Xbox One successor, if there is one, presumably will be announced at a similar point, and this is where the big question comes in as to will consoles survive, and it really depends on what they do. What I hope we see in the future, what I think we kind of need to see in the future, is to get more benefits from the idea of a console. If you want people to buy one, you need to give them real reasons to. So stuff like the subscription cost for Xbox Live, which drives the cost of a, say an Xbox One X over, a PC, it drives that significantly up and makes it not a great decision. That needs to go down, and that's why you replace it with Games Pass. That's why Xbox Live and Xbox Live Gold and PlayStation Plus have really become game subscription services when you think about it, because you get the 2 free games, and that's the big sales point for some people. When you look at these sorts of situations, you need to make them more and more advantageous to give people reasons to buy them, as opposed to just making them worse PCs. So we should see more programs like Games Pass, more sales for games so you can pick up a bigger collection which you can have on that box, and better optimized games that aren't just ports from PC, which we see more and more. And yeah, if all of these things happen, then we might not have to live in a world where there's no consoles. I always think that consoles will exist in some form. I think that I love them as a choice. I love the option of having small form factor, cheap hardware that doesn't have performance issues, that doesn't have to deal with various different update drives, etc. issues. But we're moving know, not in that direction right now, and I hope we move back towards it, because yeah, I've played console games all my life. I play them on this channel. I do play PC as well, but I love the controller as a input method. I love the concept of having these, and I hope that's something we see in the future, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the next generation goes, both in terms of, like, you know, the consoles themselves, and also, as you might get from this channel, I'm curious about the Minecraft implications. What will Minecraft PlayStation 5 and Minecraft Xbox 2 be like? Who knows for sure, but that's a curiosity that I'm looking forward to answering. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed this, and if you want to see more commentary style videos, then I really only do them like once a month or something, so you probably shouldn't subscribe to that. But if you want to see more console based stuff, then you can see that every single day on your homepage by hitting the subscribe button if you so choose. I mean, we're about to hit 1 million, so if you want to help me hit that, it'd be appreciated. But either way, I hope you'll enjoy this video, because I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.